what's the outlook of the supply chain moving forward, and how that's going to tie into the economic development of what I see and what we should be doing in this region. So if we start with if I was to grade as far as the infrastructure and the way that we handled the movement of goods throughout the pandemic, I would say it was pretty excellent. The reason why I say that is because although we did have weeks in the beginning where we did have panic purchases, where folks went out and purchased a lot of the products that they thought they were going to need because everything was going to shut down. But once everything got adjusted, there was never really a shortage of specific products that we needed in order for us to continue living. So the distributors they're doing a great job trying to maintain products on the shelves. Obviously they're battling their own issues with their manufacturers, whether it's on the mainland, whether it's in Asia, whether it's in Europe, because they're also facing shortages as well. So the products that they're getting right now, they've been pivoting, trying to source from other origins, but trying to maintain a good supply of the necessities that we need in order for us to move forward. So from a transportation perspective, obviously the shipping lines remained intact. From an air perspective, although we were not getting the passengers arriving, United, for example, stepped up and they were incorporated into moving cargo. So you will see a lot of United planes coming in on a daily basis, but probably a good 70 to 80% of those planes coming in are non-passenger. They're all freighters coming in, bringing in cargo, air cargo. And they're not bringing in from the mainland. They have routes from Shanghai, from Hong Kong. They're bringing in from Asia, trying to continue the movement of supplies within the region. Without that support, it would have been tough because of the limited flights that we have coming in from Honolulu and Japan. And that's always been a big struggle, especially on the air side. But we've been able to get that support and been able to flesh out a lot of the supply lines that we've been getting the products into Guam, Saipan, and Micronesian area. So, we're, and that's what my hat's off to the folks that have been managing that, because they've been really trying to make sure that they have everything on hand for us to do. Now, if you look on the mainland, I mean, I would tell you that, I had my parents here at the beginning of the pandemic back in March, and they left in May. They live in New York. And when they went back to New York, they showed me pictures. They said, you on the island have more products than we do here in the supermarkets here on the East Coast. So that, when we started really looking at it, it was amazing how we were able to keep the goods moving into Guam and into Saipan. Now, from a global perspective, this is where everything is going to change, because one of the things that the pandemic showed for everybody who's into moving goods or manufacturing is that in the last 20 years, obviously there's a big shift over to China. They've gone into a very deep manufacturing mindset. They got they streamlined all their supply lines. They've gotten the cost super low. Everybody's heard the just-in-time statement. And for the most part, for the last 10 to 15 years, the logistics world has been moving towards that, just in time. And everything was just in time, carry limited amount of inventory. You don't want to put all your money into inventory. So until the pandemic hit, everybody thought that they had very robust supply chains, but that was not the case. Because, for example, when you take the car manufacturers, they're not really making a good portion of the parts that are coming together for the vehicle. So, for example, the touch screen on the vehicles, that's not made in that manufacturing plant. That's being shipped over from areas like Taiwan, Japan, the touch screen. And then when you even dug even deeper into the tier 2, right? So you had the touch screen, and then when you looked at the manufacturers of the touch screens, they had subcontractors as well that had components that went into the touchscreen, which went into the vehicle. So when you looked at the different levels of manufacturing, you almost had 4 to 5 tiers of just complete standstill. So a lot of the companies were not ready to really understand how to maneuver around that. And what ended up happening was the plant just stopped. They just stopped manufacturing because they didn't have the components to continue to put things together. So in 2007, I had given a talk to a logistic forum, and I had all the big pharmaceuticals and I had all the vehicle manufacturers there. And one of the things that I had advised them was, because I saw the shift, I saw the shift to a single source manufacturer where they were just sourcing the touch screens from one vendor. And that streamlined their cost, that streamlined their product allocation. But what I tried to relay to them was the fact that, what if something happened with this single vendor? Like, what is your alternative plan? Oh, well, we can shift it here. Okay, well, fast forward to the pandemic. What about if the whole world shuts down, right? And nobody was really ready for what happened during the pandemic from a supply chain perspective. So right now, the way we see it and the way I see it, it's a big whiteboard. We're trying to put the pieces together. And the main focus for a lot of these manufacturers are now trying to see is how they can shift the making of the products, the majority of the components in origin countries, so that they don't have to deeply depend on just one source of production. The second thing that they're looking at is the reliability and visibility of the products. So when I talked about there was 5 levels underneath one product, they didn't have clear visibility on that one because it was subcontractors to a subcontractor to a subcontractor. So one of the things that they're willing to do is get better visibility on each component of the supply chain. They thought they knew, but they really didn't. And so they're willing to look at in-house production. They're looking at better visibility and availability. That's another key component that they're looking at. So it actually shifted 180 to what we've been working towards in the last 15, 20 years on really making the logistics supply chain really lean, which is not the case anymore. And those are the three perspectives: is trying to make things in-house, better visibility, accountability, and availability as far as the products that are at hand. So when we look at the future of the supply lines, you're going to see a huge shift of a lot of manufacturing being brought back to origin countries. There's going to be a huge shift in what they call a China plus one. So China is not going to go anywhere, right? They've been very at the central heart of the WTO. China has been working on being very proficient on their manufacturing, and that's not going to go away. So from a political standpoint, whether we go right or whether we go left, the WTO still stands there. China's going to be very at the forefront just because they've been building this for the last 20 years. But we're calling it China plus one. And China plus one meaning that we're either going to bring it in-house, a portion of it, or we're going to look through different sources and divide the sourcing power throughout different origin countries per se. And so that's going to be a huge shift for the manufacturing and the supply chains as a whole. Now, that includes food, that includes manufacturing products, and that includes a lot of what we use today on a day-to-day basis, whether it's soap, shampoos, not so much clothes and furniture. That can always be in-house for certain countries, but that's sort of going to be the main shift of the world today. A lot of what basically is going to try to bring everything back to in-house, so we're less dependent on outsourcing a lot of the things that we did before. So when we look at Guam, obviously, we bring in a majority of everything that we do. So how does this play into the way the world is going to shift. In my opinion, Guam stands to benefit both, whether it goes to the right or whether it goes to the left. Obviously, President Trump has a very strong stance against China. Vice President Biden has a different perspective. But either way, the way Guam is set up today, and we stand to benefit either way. And the reason being is because, again, what I said before, the change in through the pandemic pretty much gave everybody a whiteboard, and everybody is trying to align their supply chains to more of an in-house. The U.S. is aligning more towards trying to bring everything back to the mainland. There's an agreement right now with the MCA, Mexico, Canada. So trying to get everything back to the sort of same time zone, same time, from an expedited standpoint. So when you look at where we sit, we've always said that, we're the closest U.S. territory to Asia. We stand to benefit to that. And the reason why I say that is for 6 years, I worked in the Caribbean. I worked in Puerto Rico, a little bit bigger than Guam, but same sort of style, same style of culture, a little bit closer to the U.S., yes. But one of the things that Puerto Rico struggled was that during the Clinton administration, they did away with the tax incentives down in Puerto Rico. So you had a lot of manufacturing going on through the late 90s, early 2000s in Puerto Rico. A lot of pharmaceuticals, you had Panasonic, you had electronics. I mean, a bunch of manufacturing, a huge number of manufacturers were down in Puerto Rico. When the tax incentives went away in 2005, it pretty much, everybody just closed house and they all left. They went to Canada, they went to Mexico, they went to the Virgin Islands, they went throughout, shifted a lot to China. And so they lost that power, they lost that ability to have that economic development there. So one of the things when I was there at 2006, 2007, working with the local government is like, what can we do to bring some of that stuff not in that greater form, because we didn't have the tax incentives. And one of the things that we looked at was light assembly. So when we looked at, well, what's the time frame to be able to shift anything light assembly wise? Well, we took out, I don't know if you guys remember DirecTV, and DirecTV back in the mainland was, these big dishes that they would put in houses and run wires, and it comes with a remote. Well, we worked with DirecTV, we worked with them, and what we told them was, listen, you're making all these, the standalone box is made from China, but what about if we get the different components? Okay, we're not gonna make anything, but we're gonna put it together in Puerto Rico and sell it out of Puerto Rico. And with that idea in mind, it took us 6 months to ramp up, 6 months to bring in the raw materials. And on the 6th month, we started light manufacturing, putting together these boxes in Puerto Rico versus them coming in from China. And from that point on, we started looking at other markets that we can tap into. And so shifting it back to Guam, the reason why I said that we're in a good position to be able to capitalize in this shift, in this global shift, is the fact that one of the things that we're not bound by the tariffs. Our transportation infrastructure is well in place. Now, when we talk about the manpower, some of the components that we would look at, and one of the economists that I speak with, he would say that, listen, if you want to compete with China on making T-shirts and furniture, it's never going to happen. Okay, you're never going to have the labor force to be able to create that and be able to. Now, if you want to look at the pharmaceutical, if you want to look at a light assembly, you want a little bit more of a tech, then the things that you're making are not cheap. The things that you're making and putting together, like, why couldn't we put the iPhone here on Guam? Okay, the technical expertise is really not on putting it together. It's the microchips that are made in Taiwan, the components that are made in China. And it's really it's sort of a manufacturing plant of putting those components together. And when you look at those products, they're good paying products that we can pay well, right? We're not making t-shirts. We're making phones, we're making tech, we're making maybe pharmaceutical components. So, and again, maybe not pharma, maybe not medicine, but we can definitely still look into different aspects of putting, for example, not to divert, but the um, the limbs, right? The plastic limbs, the components that are used with some of these pharmaceuticals, that they have their reps at the operation table, and they're instructing the doctors on how to put those limbs and the plastic joints and all that good stuff. So a lot of things that we can look at. So again, I'll circle, this whole thing kind of circles back. There's a huge shift in the world right now from a supply chain perspective. You're going to see a lot of these pipelines really brought back home. We stand really to capitalize in this new whiteboard that's in the world, because again, where we stand, where we sit from a trade perspective, from a tariff perspective, we're US. There's a lot of capabilities that we can do here in-house. For example, somebody was talking about the soaps and that are being used in the hotels. Well, a lot of those things could actually be made here. Okay, we can bring in the raw materials here to Guam and make it and stamp it, and it's made on Guam, USA, and then ship it back to the mainland. Shipping, right? Everybody, that's always the number one and number two in the economic report every year. And I will tell you, one of the biggest issues as to why you could look at shipping being somewhat expensive into Guam, it's because it's a head hole. If we had something coming back out, right, then we could actually try to even out sort of the revenues that the shipping companies would have to pay, or the costs that coming in, with balancing with cargo going out. So if we had, we can bring in raw materials and then finished products back out. We can create the dynamic of an import-export market. Right now, it's really just an import market, which is really unbalanced for the shipping companies. So again, if we go right, we go left. We're in a good position to do it. I just, from my perspective, I'm a logistician. I've been doing this for over 25 years, but I think that we're not paying enough attention to this. I think we're still continuing to look at, the pillars that have gotten Guam to where it's at, right? Which is tourism, which is military. But if you want to just quickly, type in Puerto Rico and see how aggressive they've been on trying to get the pharmaceuticals back to the island, which they have succeeded. A lot of the farmers going back to Puerto Rico. A lot of manufacturing is going back to Puerto Rico. A lot of tech is going to Puerto Rico. And so I think that I want to be able to highlight this as a very component. And again, can it be done? It's not a 2-year, 3-year, 4-year plan. I mean, we can do this within a scope of 6 months to a year. Okay. But it's a matter of really looking which markets we want to target, knock on their door. I still have very good contacts with Johnson & Johnson, Walmart in the mainland. And again, it's going to change the dynamics of the way each country is going to do. Each country right now is spending for themselves. They're trying to keep everything in-house as much as they can, including food, because they saw the lack of resources that produced during the pandemic. And then the one last piece that's kind of interesting to watch, and if there's one prediction that I would give you, is that the pandemic has also shown a lot of vulnerability with companies depending on outside sources. And so I probably will predict and see that in the future, you already see it with Amazon. So they have their own trucking company, they have their own planes. I would venture to say that at some point, Amazon is going to have their own ships. Okay, they will get into the shipping industry. They're going to control their own logistics. They're going to be able to control the entire network. And then what they're going to do next is, after they have full control of their logistic pipeline, they're going to start selling that service and compete against the shipping companies around the world. I predict that, and I see that in writing on the wall. And then all the other companies that are going to follow, which is Walmart. And again, it's because the dependency, right? And you probably wouldn't have had the discussion 5 or 10 years ago. But remember, this whole thing is completely, there's no book, there is no textbook that will ever describe how to move forward after this pandemic. So things that were really far out there, thought processes are really coming to fruition. And so that's what would be my one prediction, is that you're going to see a lot of dependency get shortened by companies that are going to do everything in-house and themselves, whether from a transportation perspective, it's going to be air, ocean, warehousing, trucking, drone delivery. That's a big one as well. That's really coming about. You know, we're probably a couple of weeks out, but you know, we will be there will be a company coming out and testing out the drone deliveries here on Guam as well, for the small package deliveries. There's been an acceleration process and technology. I think there was one study that said that this whole pandemic accelerated certain areas by 2 years. And they had to do it because in order for those companies to survive, they had to get into more of an IT infrastructure. On the downside of that is we talk about a lot of digitization, but the only thing that I would caution companies is it's very easy to say, you know, I want to go digital, but it really only works if you have the data to go into these components. If you just think that I want to go, you know, put everything online, and you don't really have the true data, it may not really work for you. And you sort of see that with the app that the government tried to launch, and they were trying to get about 60% of folks using it. So that sort of kind of correlates to you know, some of the issues that a lot of the IT folks go through. And then finally, you know, again, when we circle back to the entire economic development, I really want to be able to highlight the fact that we stand in a good position to be able to look at these things and bring a lot of stuff in-house here on Guam, and be able to work with the U.S. government, federal government, on being able to even just have a small portion of what they're doing right now, because President Trump's team under Peter Navarro right now, they're looking at all these different regions throughout the mainland U.S. and Puerto Rico and Alaska, and all. They're looking at that. We need to be part of that. We need to be part of that discussion and raise our hand and say, listen, you know, we can do that as well. Maybe not in a big scale, but enough for us to be able to play into. And so as a different source, and if something ever does go down, whether it's a hurricane that hits Florida, a hurricane that hits Texas, Louisiana, or an earthquake that goes into California, and there's a production plant there that goes down, well, we can shift it to a different source. And you have multiple components within the US matrix that can supply the US with these products. So, you know, that's my spiel on you know, how we did through the pandemic, what the outlook's what to me the outlook is going to be, and you know, certain predictions as far as, you know, what we can do here from an economic development. And again, it's we can do it. It's very doable. It's been done. I've done it in Puerto Rico, and so if somebody was to ever challenge me, I would love to have that conversation, because we should be doing that right now. We should have a game plan and a path to be going after these segments, parallel to trying to open up the island to tourism, and obviously trying to get the island opened up economically. And that's all I have. So I appreciate it. Thank you for your time. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask me.
Any questions out there?
Great. Yeah, I have. My first question is, you when you introduced yourself, you said fellow Rotarians. So I'm assuming you're in any of the other clubs on the island?
Yes, I belong to the Northern Guam.
Oh, sorry to hear that. Going on. I'm just kidding. I used to be, I'm a past president from Northern Guam.
Oh, okay.
The question is, when, I guess your input, especially with your Puerto Rico experience isn't one of the great barriers to assembling or manufacturing on Guam. Bringing stuff in here and then moving it back out, besides the logistics of doing that, but also because we have our own customs zone. We're not part of U.S. customs. So we can't clear U.S. customs before we ship things to the U.S., for instance, and so on. And how is that structured in Puerto Rico? Is that the same? Does Puerto Rico have their own?
Yep, exactly. It's if you look at what we have here, we have Puerto Rico has a similar structure. Even they have their own IRS, which is called Hacienda, which it's similar to what we have here as well, with tax and rev and tax. But when we look at the difference between Puerto Rico and Guam, you could look at Guam as sort of a free trade zone island as a whole. So basically, when we bring in products here, yes, we have the use tax, but we're not bound by any tariffs. When you go to Puerto Rico, you're bound by the tariffs, unless you are in a designated free trade zone. So, for example, where we did the light manufacturing, we moved the warehouse into a 300,000 foot facility within a free trade zone. So all the neighboring warehouses were all within this one free trade zone. And we had to do that in order to sort of work through the taxes, which made it more convenient for us. But so there's no tariffs coming into Guam. And then once we're able to tag it as Guam, USA, when it ships back to the mainland US, there's no tariffs on that either, right? So it's different than if you ship it from Korea to the US or from China to the US. Now, from a shipping perspective, obviously, from a tech perspective, we're a lot closer to the countries that are making these products. The chips are being made in Taiwan, touchscreens are made in Japan. I mean, we're fairly close to where all these different components are being made today. Now, what I was saying about balancing the shipping is, from where I stand, is if we can create an export out of Guam, then we can try to balance out the cost to ship it back to the mainland US. And the other component to that would have to be is there's a savings there too, right? Depending on what the product is, depending on what the finished product is, they wouldn't be taxed coming into the US. So there's a savings there as well. So we would have to look at, right, what is the cost of shipping it to the mainland US versus the savings of paying the tax.
I have a question. From your point, I'm Bob Kelly, sorry.
Hey, Bob.
From when you start looking at Guam and our shipping capabilities in Guam, where do you see kind of the biggest weakness, and how would that be, and how could we address that? Probably
the biggest weakness that I see is in being able to service some of the well, there's two components to that, right? So we have 4 companies that are 2 foreign flag companies, right? So we have 2 foreign ships that come in to Guam, and then 2 U.S. flags, right? We have ourselves and Matson, and then you have Kiowa and PIL Mel that come in. The only actually downside from an ocean perspective would be if it's something happened within the port area in the terminal, which they're working on right now. That's the only weakness that I really see from an ocean perspective, because we have the capacity. The ships have the capacity to bring in plenty of cargo. Matson just launched their new ships coming in. They're very large. They're going over China, picking up cargo from there and taking it off to the West Coast. So really the only weakness would be from just being able to ensure that we have the capability if something was to happen at the port. But Rory's been doing a great job down there, and they're really doing a good job on trying to put a backup plans to that.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
I got one. My question is, when the whole pandemic started, do you see more companies out here, be it grocery stores, look towards Asia to bring in goods? Are they like moving towards more, maybe bringing more vegetables from Korea, Taiwan, food items, or juices, things like that, since seems like the Asian countries they have a better hold on this pandemic, and they're opening up their manufacturing and their businesses, and their society is a lot more open than ours. Our distributors out here saying, you know what, the US is having problems. Manufacturing plants are closing down there due to positive testing. Maybe
Yeah.
start looking towards Asia to bring in more maybe food items, because I know and early on, all the hand sanitizers you can find on Guam were in English, but if you look at the back, they're all from Korea. You
Korea.
know, our distributors are now looking more towards Asian countries than US brands.
Yeah, and you know they've been doing that, and they had to do it in order. Again, for me, I would say they've done a great job on trying to keep. So and you may not see the shelves completely full, but at least there's a good portion of those products on the shelf, and they've had to pivot to source those products in Asia, Australia, New Zealand, you know, areas where it would sort of not be conducive because of the time frame to get the products in here. But if they're able to get it, that's where they're sourcing it from. So Philippines is another good one. But the one thing that I would caution is the fact that although those countries, you know, Vietnam, Thailand, when the pandemic hit, they really put a strong hold on certain products leaving their country because they wanted to use the rice for their people. So once they limit the amount of exports or just completely said, nope, we're not selling any exports of these specific products when it came to food, it's really less, you know, it's softened up now. So they've been able to get a lot more products out of these countries. But yes, the shift has happened. And really the distributors and the supermarkets have been trying to source wherever they can to be able to meet the needs of the people. And honestly, you know, again, I think that, you know, maybe the variety is not there, but at least I can still get, you know, the main products that I need to be able to survive. The other unique thing, you know, when we talked about toilet paper. If you haven't seen it, or you may see it, you may see some of these toilet and more of industrial type toilet paper and paper towels, and the reason being is because the manufacturers of you know, P&G, Kimberly-Clark, the manufacturers, a good portion of their business was industrial, hotels, and so the grade of tissue paper was completely different, right? It's not the soft, you know, cuddly bear that everybody wants, you know, in their butt. But so when the pandemic hit, they almost had to cease production. They have tons of inventory of this industrial type toilet paper and paper towels, and so they also had to shift because now it's not so much industrial, it's more home, right? It's more a home consumption that because people aren't going to work, people are not going to the hotels, people are not going into the office buildings. So that style of paper wasn't really useful, but there's a lot of inventory. So until they really ramp back up to making home, you know, touchy-feely, bear huggly toilet paper, you may see a different brand of toilet paper and paper towels in the market because that's really what they have right now. Have you guys seen any of that yet, or?
Yeah, I see it. It's the individual rolls that's wrapped in another colorful tissue paper.
Yeah, exactly. And it's I mean, I've bought that because that's the only have, and it's a little rough. But I mean, we were just talking about using newspaper, so I mean, it's okay, you know. I mean, we'll survive. But again, logistically, if you didn't know, that's the issue with toilet paper.
I have a question for you, Fred Black here. Charles, appreciate you coming to our club. Most of this I don't understand. I've always thought of customs as a negative. Control of our customs is negative for us because we have to pay for all those people. Whereas in California, the federal government pays for all those people. We have to pay for that ourselves. So that's one of the negative things. Now you're suggesting this new manufacturing on Guam. Do you see a benefit under that scheme in remaining outside of U.S. customs control?
Yeah, I mean, the benefit is the fact that, again, we're able to control the mandate on the imports and the raw materials and everything that comes in. If, and again, if that changes, different laws and applications would apply to Guam. And so sometimes when I start talking about this, everybody's like, don't start talking about that because, it's bad juju because, we have a good thing going but that's the reality. The reality is that we have a system that we're able to take advantage of because we have our own local custom laws.
Other than this new manufacturing business, do you see other reasons why we benefited from, because it costs us millions and millions of dollars more that we wouldn't if we were the state of California. So other than this thought that someday we might become a manufacturing hub, is there any other benefit that less paying for our own customs agent?
Well, I think, being able to, I think having an in-house sort of, it can go either way. But I think that would be for me, just without really looking at it, but I think that would be our greatest benefit, being able to control our import export ourselves would be a huge benefit. But I mean, the U.S. Customs is involved as well. I mean, once the products and whenever we ship anything out of Guam, it still goes through the natural U.S. Customs channels going back to the U.S. It's just that we don't have to pay any taxes when we get to the States. And obviously the biggest, the supply and demand and the being able to, the buying power that you have coming into the West Coast is huge, right? I mean, the one thing that we've always sort of talked about was the fact that, for example, Home Depot, they probably have a ship, maybe on our ship, maybe on Matson, maybe that leaves China with all their finished goods, right? Appliances, furniture, that probably passes Guam and goes to California. And then it gets rehandled and reloaded into a Guam container, and then it comes back to Guam. So that's always been interesting, because when I look at the lines of leaving Shanghai and then they're kind of going down south and they head to California, I'm like, you're passing Guam. I'm like, hey, can you just make a quick pit stop, dump a couple of containers, of finished goods, but those are the things that we need to continue to discuss. I mean, because again, in my mind, it's a whiteboard right now. When people laughed at me about hey, can you just make a quick stop here and just kind of dump a couple of containers of finished? It's still coming from Home Depot, but it doesn't have to go back to the West Coast, rehandled, and come back to Guam. They would laugh, but now they don't. They're not laughing as much. So that's what I would say. It's the buying power. It has a lot to do with the buying power.
Charlie, why don't they do it now?
Oh no, that's what I'm saying. Because of the so one of the things that we discussed with the plants, we've actually spoken to the plants, manufacturing plants in China, and so it's what we've always talked about, right? You're talking about Guam, and Guam really makes a lot of noise. I mean, as much as you guys don't think, Guam, for such a small island that we are, we make such huge noise. I mean, look at Ross, right? Ross is probably one or two of the stores that makes the most money within their West Coast network. If the Guam stores have a bad week, they see it, they feel it on the mainland. Same thing with Home Depot. So when we spoke to the manufacturers out there, one of the things that they said was their systems are so they're so robust. This is back before the pandemic. They're so robust and they're so very automated that it's, Home Depot is going to order 20,000 washers, right? And so the plant does 20,000 washers, 20,000. And so it doesn't have the capability to say 20, and then, okay, this one goes to Guam, 20, and okay, this one goes to Guam. So they just said logistically, for the amount of work that it would take to segregate some of these things, They just weren't at that point willing to look at it. So, but I think that's all changed, honestly. But that's sort of the discussion that we've had with them.
You know, one problem I see with assembling iPhones on Guam is, besides the logistics and the touch screens, is, if anybody will attest to it, has ever changed the screen on their phone, is you really need to have very small fingers, because the parts are so small, and I don't think we have the labor to really handle that locally.
Yeah, exactly. But you know, you'll be surprised. I mean, although the other thing that has really accelerated is the fact that there's still manpower being used, but there's robots actually that are helping put these things together. And so from a coronavirus perspective, that's really has helped out a lot of manufacturing, as well as having been able to have in place some of these robots, and being able to space out the people so that they can work. So I think it's very doable, and maybe maybe the iPhones could be a good market, but I'm sure there's plenty of other markets. But I don't think we should play into making furniture, clothes. I mean, that's very low margin, very competitive. That's not, we should not be looking at those markets.
Hi, Charlie. Jeff Schindler here. Thank you for joining our club. Quick question. We talk about supply and demand, and from an economic standpoint, as far as shipping goes, obviously supply and demand with retailers not being able to open their shops and things like that. Economically, how has that affected your business, and has things shifted where there's more demand for different supplies?
Yeah, that's exactly what has happened. So I would tell you right now that if you would probably not be able to find any space in a warehouse on the West Coast right now. Every warehouse there is full with products from retail stores, from mall stores that have not been able to be placed in the stores. So the demand for specific products has shifted and changed. So you have warehouses full of items that may or may not sell. The demand for different products, and for example, the demand for PPEs, right? That's completely shifted. So we've seen our business really shift from a retail. Our ships are pretty packed coming from Asia, from China, with PPEs, a lot of protective gear, and then the products that are being sourced as well has changed. Amazon is probably the #1 importer, and you see the way they work with different companies, the way they source their products. So I mean, there's a reason why when you make an order online, and you order 5 things and you get them separately, right? You get 5 different packages, 2 on one day, one via FedEx, one via USPS. And it's because they're all sourced. The way that Amazon works is they connect themselves with different sourcing, and so they don't have everything in house. Amazon doesn't have everything under one warehouse. They have a good portion of the products, but not everything. So we've seen a huge uptick in the demand, which a lot of the Chinese plants are trying, and Asia plants are trying to keep up. They haven't been able to, and so we've actually seen an uptick in volume coming out of Asia. So from a business perspective, I would tell you that our imports into the mainland U.S. are probably at or a little higher than they were last year, actually.
Nice. Thank you. Any other questions out there? Yeah, I got. Oh, real quick. What is our capability to repair those very large shipping ships out here? I know we upgraded our dry dock and all that for military ships, but what do we have out here if one of your large ships needs a lot of attention?
Yeah, so I mean, right now we've run into that situation now, and obviously we have 2 We have two viable companies here, Cabris Marine, being one as well. But, we have two right now. I think that's one of the things that are in discussions is, Matt is trying to be able to create that market to be able to service the ships here on Guam. And that's another market. I mean, you've seen the flyers, you've seen the educational promos out there about training and hands-on and being able to work in the maritime industry, as whether it's a welder and so forth. So I think that's one capability that we really need to solidify here on Guam, to be able to have that capability not only for the commercial ships, but to be able to support the military as a whole. So that's also been a big push to be able to get some of that work that's being done in Singapore, some of that work brought back to Guam. And there's really no reason why we should not have that type of capability here on Guam.
Right. Cool. Thank you. Any other questions out there?
I've got one. Is there, and from my position, probably a position of ignorance on the basis of Jones Act, but if the Jones Act, how much does it play on pricing and availability? What if Ocasio-Cortez is successful in removing the Jones Act applicability or removing it completely? What benefits, pros and cons for Guam if something like that happens?
Well, so I'm a big proponent of the U.S. Merchant Marine, the U.S. flag. Now, I really think that under the Jones Act, it needs a lot of reform. And the reason why I'm in a position to say that is because I think a lot of folks might misunderstand the Jones Act and the way it applies to Guam, because the Jones Act as it stands does not fully apply to Guam. So you have a Jones Act carrier, which is Matson, but APL is not a Jones Act carrier. So we're under a different program called the MSPS. We're under the Maritime Security Program, so which is completely different than Puerto Rico, Alaska, and Hawaii. Hawaii, Alaska, and Puerto Rico are fully Jones Act. Guam is somewhat Jones Act exempt. Okay, so that's a little bit of the difference. So when we talk about the Jones Act, we really have to break it down into different components, because what I talk about is about the U.S. flag, because my service is not Jones Act. We're under a different program. So when I start to explain that to people, then they get a better sense of, okay, so we're not really talking about the Jones Act. We're really talking about the U.S. flag and what it means. So from a security perspective, okay, I will tell you that the reason why I say that the Jones Act needs reform is because one of the issues, one of the cases that they bring up is security, national security. Well, about a year ago, the Maritime Administration, they wanted to see at what level of capability they were at. If we were to go to a major war, let's just say against China, at what readiness were we? And unfortunately, it was very eye-opening. We were at 40%. Okay, that's not good at all. When you look at the readiness of China and the way that they've been doing for the last 5 to 10 years, they're pumping out ships left and right? Why? Because they can do it cheaper. And so when you look at the Jones Act says that in order for you to move goods between two states from two U.S. origin points, you have to move it under a U.S. built ship, U.S. crewed, and U.S. flagged, except for Guam. And Guam is, if you're under the Maritime Security Program, then our ships are not made in the U.S., but they're crewed by U.S. and they're flagged by the U.S. And so, those are some of the things that I really want to bring up when it comes to reform with the Jones Act, because if you get rid of the Jones Act here, it's really, it's not going to make a huge difference. And the reason why I say that is because it's not a natural lane. Let me put it that way. So Shanghai to LA, it's a natural lane. you have plenty of cargo, you have plenty of ships. The economics is there to drive, to be able, from a business perspective, to drive a business within that lane. When you look at Guam, it's a head haul, right? So you're only bringing things to Guam. You're not bringing anything out. So economically, when you look at, okay, from a business perspective, how do I make my money? Like, as from a shipping company, how do I make my money? So, because I'm not bringing anything out, it has to be brought in. And when you look at the time, all right, so the transit time, and then when you look at how many ships you would need to be able to sustain that service, it makes it a little difficult to sustain when you look at non-U.S. flagships coming into service here. So I will plug APL. I mean, I think that we've done in a very aggressive. We brought in the competitiveness of being able to bring another U.S. flag carrier to Guam to be able to compete. Competition is healthy. We're not under the Jones Act. We're under the MSP program. It's a completely different program. We do receive a subsidy from the U.S. government to be able to sustain these trade lanes so that we can able to operate and be able to be economically efficient. But at the same time, it's, the Jones Act side, there's a lot of folks that would really like for us to leave town, if you guys know what I mean. So, there's another lawsuit unfortunately by Matson against the Department of Transportation. And, I think that's really unhealthy. I think we got to make sure that we maintain, and my thing when I came here to Guam, I was trying to make sure that we did everything we can to be very competitive, to get the rates at a level to where it was conducive to be able to source products from the mainland and not be so expensive. And we're going to continue to look at that. We're here for the long haul, and so it's pretty tough to say, if we get rid of the Jones Act, how's that going to come into play? Because it's a really, you got to break it down into different components, because the other thing you also have to look at is the economics behind the distributors and all the folks that are selling the products. They also have to maintain a good diligence on making sure that they offer the best price out there as well, because I can offer $100 container, and maybe the distributor or the supermarkets may not change their price. So it's a whole chain of different components that really play into the price of the goods. Transportation is one part, and I think that we continue to find ways to be able to get leaner on being able to offer competitive rates. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Anybody else?
And that's why I still pull that offer. I would love to, just from a friendly debate, with my counterpart there at Matson, that I think it would be fun. I really think it would be fun. Hopefully she'll take me up one of these days.
Cool. Let's make that happen.
Yeah. Let's do it. That'd be. Let's raise some money. Let's raise some money for the club. I think people would pay, honestly. And it's not a right or wrong. It's just kind of putting everything on the table, and just a good debate. I've been again. I'm not against the Jones Act. I'm a very, very for U.S. flag merchant marine. That is my number one goal. We're very for U.S. flag, strengthening our merchant marine, and I think the Jones Act needs a lot of reform.
We'll let Bernie know you called her a chicken, see if that helps.
Oh, no. I have a lot of respect for Bernie, a lot of respect.
Okay. Does anybody else, on that note, anybody else have any last final questions? I think we held him for an hour here talking. So anybody else out there? If not, I'll close it up.
Does he get a free Rotary mug now, or
he gets a free Rotary mug when things open. When we're on lockdown, I think P-Core 3 to 0.7 something. I don't know.
Let's
So we'll
give a
pass.
big
Yeah.
hand to Charles.
Yeah, so help
Yeah.
me push, the agenda with trying to, utilize the supply chain and what we can do here from a manufacturing standpoint, to get some of these things going here on island. We're always going to concentrate on tourism, military. We right now it's the time to be knocking on the doors of all these different companies. I've spoken to several companies, and the one question that they ask is like, they don't know anything. They don't know the things behind being able to work here on Guam. And once I share the information with them, they're like, it makes sense. It makes sense. So we need to be able to continue to promote that. So I really need everybody's help to continue to, it's just
Charlie,
a personal agenda, just a personal.
Is the tuna industry ever coming back to Guam, or that was a big deal in the 90s where we're trying to have export of tuna, but then I understand the schools moved on and to Marshall Islands, Micronesia. Is there any possibility that ever comes back to the island, to Guam?
And you know what? I just heard that one of the companies that shifted a lot of their work up to Japan, they just closed. One of the tuna factories, one of the major tuna factories in Japan, just closed. And what that creates, again, remember we were just talking about supply and demand. I mean, they're going to need a source to be able to get tuna, and so we got to be able to look at everything. And again, we got to be able to put the pieces on the table and see, take those pieces and then throw them against the board, and you'll see what sticks. Something has to stick.
Hopefully.
Oh yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Other than that, I think we should just close it up. Thank you for joining us and giving us an hour of your time and your lunch. So
No, absolutely. Thank you so much.
yeah, thank you for joining us, and real good discussion. Totally agree with you on we need a plan B besides tourism and the military. So manufacturing seems like the way to go.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and thank you for Charlie for helping us out and being a speaker this week.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Cool. And I think final note: are we supposed to vote for past president Dave for Guam Chamber? Are you supposed to vote for you? How does that work?
Yes, please vote for me. Number 1 on the ballot.
Yeah.
Guam Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors. I think Charlie is also a candidate. As a fellow Rotarian, I would endorse him. Give him one of your votes too.
Cool.
And
Right back at you.
Thank you all in advance. Appreciate
What
it.
are you running on opening up the economy?
Absolutely, as soon as possible, as safely and as responsibly as possible, but get people back to work. I'm looking at my window and see $1 billion in real estate. I can see, Beverly, get back in your room. Someone's going to yell at you from the beach. Get in your room. I can see you from my office. But there's $1 billion in real estate down there that's sitting idle. And hotels don't open to sell bento boxes out the front door. We got to open this thing back up. So there you go. There's my platform.
Good platform. The hotel rooms are getting moldy. Trust me, I know. I treat them.
Well, I insure them, and that's one of the biggest costs next to insurance and power is they can't shut down the air conditioners because black mold happens within hours, and it's just crazy to see the stuff that they have to put up with. It's amazing.
Yeah, it seems like hotels are always losing money. So, okay. Other than that, thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll keep in touch. Remember, this weekend, get your running shoes on or walking shoes on and join us for a 5K. If you didn't sign up yet, rotaryofguam.org under events. Other than that, I want to say thank you everyone, and I'll see you all next week. Goodbye. Enjoy your late lunch.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Good luck, Bev. Bye, Steve.